The suffering of the Waldensians. Welcome, dear listener. Before we begin, take a moment to settle in. Perhaps you're lying comfortably in your bed, the weight of the blankets pulling gently on your shoulders. Maybe you hear a soft breeze outside your window or the hum of silence in the room around you. Let your breath slow. Let your muscles loosen. You are safe here, and it's time to journey far back, into the quiet shadows of the Alps, into a time when faith and fire shaped lives. This is the story of Lenora, a young girl of the Waldensian faith, and of her people, humble folk who lived high in the Alps during a time when to believe differently was to risk everything. It's a story not of war or glory, but of stillness, endurance, and the quiet courage of living one day more, even when the world turns its back on you. The snow beneath her feet. In the deep shadows of the Western Alps, where pine trees wept with winter frost and stones lay buried under feet of ancient snow, a girl moved quietly through the forest. Her name was Lenora, and she was 12. The year was 1393, though time in the valleys no longer ran by the church calendar. The Waldensians, her people, had long been driven from the towns and cities below. Now, they hid in the folds of the mountains like seeds tucked beneath stone. They had no churches. Their prayers were spoken in whispers. Their gatherings, secret. Their Bibles, handwritten and hidden in cloth bundles. That morning, Lenora had left before the sun rose fully. The snow beneath her feet had crusted over with cold, and the weight of her leather boots broke it with each step. She carried a woven basket, lined with fur, in which she hoped to gather winter herbs from the sheltered roots of the trees. Behind her, smoke rose faintly from the chimney of the stone house her father had built into the slope of the mountain. It was not much, one room, a loft, and a door that leaned slightly crooked. But it was home. The air bit at her cheeks. Her scarf, a worn patch of goat's wool, scratched her neck, but she welcomed the pain. It was real. Unlike the fear, which was quiet, and never truly gone. They were always waiting. Waiting for snow to thaw. Waiting for the priest hunters from the valleys. Waiting for someone to betray them. She crouched beside a rock wall, brushing away the frost from its base. Beneath the stone, curled like a green sigh against death, was a sprig of winter savory. She smiled. That was when she heard it. The distant crunch of boots. Not her father's, his stride was heavier. Not her brother's, he whistled. This step was careful, deliberate. She froze. Snow melted beneath her hand. Her heart, too loud, tried to beat its way out of her chest. Then came the voice. A whisper. Lenora. She turned. It was Brother Emile, the wandering preacher. His cloak was white with snow, his breath clouding around his beard. You must come, he said softly. Your father, he says it is time to prepare. The hidden gathering. The wind in the higher branches murmured like a distant chant as Lenora followed Brother Emile along a narrow path winding up through pine and stone. Her breath was shallow, her fingers buried deep in her sleeves. The sky overhead was soft gray, the sun not yet breaking through the morning clouds. They said the gatherings were safest at dawn, before the mist rose from the valleys and spies could climb the switchbacks. Brother Emile did not speak again as they walked. He was tall, his shoulders hunched slightly with age, his boots worn from years of wandering between the hidden homes of the faithful. He carried no sword. The Waldensians did not believe in violence. Only prayer. Only truth. They walked for nearly an hour, slipping between rock outcrops and leaning evergreens, until they reached a clearing. The snow here had been trampled, faintly, carefully. Beneath a heavy wooden overhang built into the hillside was the entrance to the salle basse, a hidden chamber where the Waldensians prayed. A man stood by the entrance, bundled in a wool cloak dyed the soft gray of stone. He nodded silently to Emil, then stepped aside. Inside, the air was warmer. The heat came not from fire, but from bodies pressed together in stillness, breathing slowly. There were perhaps 30 people in the low-ceilinged room, men, women, and children seated on narrow benches carved from pine trunks. A single lantern hung from the beam above, its light dim and golden. Its flame was shielded by blackened glass, so no one from outside could see its glow. Lenora sat beside her father and her brother, Daniel, who gave her a brief squeeze of the hand. Her father did not look at her. His face was as still as stone. He was a good man, kind with the goats, skilled with wood. But the years had carved silence into him, and he had not smiled since her mother died. At the front of the chamber, Brother Emil stepped up to a simple table made from hewn wood. He laid a cloth across it, hand-woven, embroidered with a plain black cross. He opened the book. The Waldensian Bible was not Latin. It was written in Occitan, the language of their people, passed down not by kings or priests but by farmers and shepherds and stonemasons. It had been copied by hand, line by line, each page a labor of love and defiance. Emil's voice was low, reverent, and steady. Though we walk in the valley of the shadow of death, we shall not fear. Not the sword, nor the flame, nor the hunger of winter. For he is with us. Even here. Lenora closed her eyes. Around her, the others bowed their heads. There was no music. No chanting. Only silence and breath and the rustle of wool. After the reading, Emil spoke of warnings. Of rumors from the valleys. 2 villages burned near Bryankin. A priest captured near Cell. Armed men passing through dressed as merchants. We will scatter again, he said softly. The thaw is weeks away, but we must prepare now. The forest will hide you. The stones will feed you. The Lord will sustain us, as he always has. No one argued. They knew what it meant. For Lenora, it meant leaving their home. Again. The cold farewell. They returned home before midday, the mist beginning to lift from the lower slopes. The goats were restless, their breath steaming as they huddled beneath the lean-to beside the house. Her father said little as he gathered tools, a spade, an axe, and a satchel of seeds wrapped in oiled cloth. We go tomorrow, he said simply, as if saying they would visit the village or mend a fence. Nightfall. While the moon is thin. Lenora packed her small bundle quietly. 1 wool dress. A length of rope. A knife. The winter savory she had picked. A worn book of psalms her mother once read to her by firelight. That evening, they shared what little they had, barley bread and salted root, soaked in warm broth made from dried onions and herbs. Daniel carved a new walking staff from ash wood, his hands moving without sound, his jaw tight with thought. As the sun set behind the peaks, casting long blue shadows across the valley, Lenora stepped outside. She stood in the snow, her breath rising in puffs, and looked toward the southern ridge. Somewhere beyond those jagged peaks lay the next hiding place. Another cave, perhaps. Or a shepherd's abandoned hut. Somewhere no one would think to look. The stars blinked through the frost-covered sky, cold and endless. She whispered, "Mama, are you watching?" And then she went back inside. Into the mountain's shadow. Night fell gently across the forest, muffling the world in velvet blue and silence. The snow, layered over weeks of storms, creaked faintly under their boots as they left their home behind. Her father led the way, lantern-hooded, stepping carefully along a deer path he had walked since childhood. Daniel followed, carrying a pack of dried beans and cured goat meat. Lenora walked last, her basket looped through one arm, her other hand gripping the walking staff Daniel made for her. They passed under thick pine branches, heavy with snow. The world smelled of resin and cold stone. By midnight, they reached a rocky ledge overlooking the distant valley floor. Far below, flickers of light moved, torches, perhaps. Patrols. Or travelers. "We move east," her father whispered. "Toward the glacier. There's a cave beyond the icefall." Lenora said nothing. Her feet ached. Her legs burned. But she kept walking. The cave was reached just before dawn. It was narrow, its mouth hidden behind a fall of stone. Inside, the floor was dry and sloped gently upward. Her father gathered pine needles for bedding. Daniel sealed the entrance with snow and branches. "They would stay here," he said, "until the priest hunters pass." And so began the long, quiet waiting. The long silence. The cave grew colder with each passing hour. Lenora awoke to the soft drip of melted frost from the ceiling. The thin animal skin beneath her could not keep out the chill of the mountain stone, but she had grown used to sleeping with cold toes and stiff fingers. Her brother, Daniel, lay curled beside her, his breathing steady, his face hidden in the fold of his cloak. Her father sat near the cave mouth, his back to them, watching the narrow crack of gray light that filtered through the bundled pine boughs. He had not slept. He rarely did any more. For 3 days, they remained there, venturing out only once when the air felt safe and the snow seemed untouched by strangers' boots. Lenora collected bark from the pine trees to chew for warmth and sap to use for kindling. Daniel caught a rabbit using a snare of knotted twine. They cooked it slowly, the scent so faint it barely reached their noses, for fear of being smelled by passing scouts. On the 4th night, her father gave her the Bible again. The pages were wrapped in linen, fragile from the damp. "Read aloud," he whispered. Quietly. And so Lenora read by candlelight. "Blessed are those who hunger now, for they shall be filled. Blessed are those who weep, for they shall laugh." Her voice trembled. Not because of the words, but because she wanted to believe them. Outside, the wind carried faint echoes, whispers down the mountain, like voices shouting far away. Her father stood, listening. Then he said, "Tomorrow, we go deeper. Beneath the ice." They rose before dawn, packing their things in silence. The cave had grown too dangerous. Others may have seen their tracks, or smelled the smoke from their hidden fire. In the mountains, even a single thread left on a branch could mean death. They moved east, toward the glacier. It was not a true glacier as some knew it, no great white river, no vast field of ice, but a frozen pass, slick and treacherous, where even the trees did not grow. The air there was thin. The rocks shattered under frost. But beyond it, her father said, there were older caves, long forgotten, deep in the cliffs. Lenora slipped once, her foot skidding on a patch of hidden ice. Daniel caught her wrist and pulled her back. "You're too light," he said gently. "Tie yourself to me next time." They crossed the pass under a sunless sky, clouds heavy and low. Snow drifted like ash from the peaks, swirling between stones. At midday, they found it. A crack in the mountainside, half concealed by frozen moss and a curtain of icicles, no wider than a goat trail. Inside, it opened into a chamber of quiet cold, with walls slick with frost and a ceiling that sloped into shadow. It had once been a miner's shelter, long before even the Waldensians had come. They set no fire. Only dry straw to sit upon, and stones to block the wind. That night, Lenora dreamed of her mother's voice, humming from somewhere deep in the earth. Whispers from the south. It was in that cave that they first heard of the fire in Marindal. A boy arrived one night, half frozen and alone. He was no older than Daniel. His cloak was torn, and he had no shoes. His name was Tomas, and he had been running for 2 days. There were soldiers, he whispered, once they'd fed him a strip of smoked meat. French ones. With torches. They came through the valley, burning everything. Lenora felt her stomach tighten. They lit the barns, Tomas said, staring at the stone floor. Then the houses. Then the orchard. Some tried to run. They were caught. The priest told them to kneel. Her father asked, "And your family?" "I ran," Tomas said. "I don't know." Silence fell. Later, after Tomas had fallen asleep beside the fireless warmth of their breath, Lenora asked her father why they hated them so much. "We are not Roman," he said. "We do not kneel to their pope. We do not pay their tithes. They say we are heretics. But we hurt no one." Her father nodded slowly. "And that, too, they fear. Hunger at the heart." By the 3rd week in the mountain cave, the food began to run low. The snow had grown deeper. The roots were frozen. The bark had lost its flavor. Even the moss on the stone grew brittle and sour. Daniel spent hours in the forest, setting traps, but they often returned empty. Once he brought back a half-starved raven, which he had found too weak to fly. They roasted it in silence. Lenora chewed pine needles to keep her mouth busy. They were bitter, but they soothed her belly. Her father fell ill. First it was coughing. Then fever. He grew quiet, then restless. On the 5th day, he stopped speaking. Daniel soaked cloth in melted snow and laid it across their father's forehead. "He needs medicine," Daniel whispered. Lenora knew what that meant. She would have to go. Alone. The return through snow. Lenora left the shepherd's hut just before dawn. The air was colder than before, her breath rising in thick clouds. She wrapped the herbs tightly in cloth and tied them beneath her cloak, near her chest where they might stay warm. The descent had been silent. The return would be treacherous. Every branch, every gust of wind could mean danger. She walked slowly, the snow deeper now than before. Her feet ached, but she kept moving, using her staff to steady her steps along the ridge. By midday, snow began to fall again. Not in thick flurries, but in a slow, constant sift, fine as flour. The familiar stones slowly reappeared. A notch in a pine tree. A bend in the path where a stream once ran, now frozen. She reached the narrow crevice just before nightfall. Inside the cave, the air was still. Her father lay on his side, his skin pale. Daniel rose quickly, helping her unwrap the herbs. "Boil what you can," she whispered. "If the fire is small, no smoke will escape." They soaked the herbs in hot water, pressed them into cloth, and laid the mixture against their father's chest. A sharp, minty scent filled the cave. They did not speak. But as her father stirred slightly and muttered a prayer, Lenora closed her eyes in quiet thanks. Fires in the valley. It was Tomas who saw the smoke first. He had climbed to a narrow ledge outside the cave where the snow had blown thin, giving him a view of the southern valley. He crouched there for hours, wrapped in a blanket, watching. When he returned, his face was white. "Smoke," he said. "In the valley below. 5 columns. Too dark for hearth fires. Too still for field burning." Daniel looked at their father, who slept now under layers of goat hide and wool. Lenora stepped outside, peering through the thinning pine. In the distance, where the valley curved like a sleeping arm, there rose 5 trails of dark smoke. Villages. Someone was burning them. The prayer of ashes. That night, they prayed together for the first time in weeks. They sat in a circle inside the cave, the candlelight faint against the frost-slick walls. The Bible rested on a smooth stone in the center, open to Psalms. Each took a turn reading a verse. Even Tomas, whose voice broke slightly when he began. "Deliver us from the hand of our enemies. Let not our names be forgotten from the earth." Afterward, they sat in silence. Outside, the wind had begun to moan again, pushing through the trees like a spirit seeking warmth. Lenora thought of the valley. Of the people who had not reached the caves. Of those who had stayed too long. She leaned her head on her brother's shoulder. And the darkness around them deepened. The mountain's mercy. Spring came slowly to the high Alps. It did not arrive in green fields or warm air, but in small signs, a drip of water from an icicle, a patch of brown earth beneath the pines, the distant call of a bird not heard since autumn. Lenora noticed it first when the snow beneath her boots began to crunch less and squish more. Wet snow meant melt. Melt meant time to move. Her father had recovered enough to sit upright, though he still spoke little. His cough had lessened. His eyes looked brighter. Daniel began scouting farther down the mountain, seeking paths that might be safe for travel. He found broken branches, torn cloth caught on thorns. "They've been here," he said quietly one night. "Did they find us?" Tomas asked. Daniel shook his head. "Not yet. But they will." It was decided. They would descend. The path of the exiles. They packed everything. The dried roots. The herbs. The Bible, wrapped in goatskin. The little blanket that still carried their mother's scent. The cave had kept them safe, but it was not home. It was a waiting place. Now they needed to move beyond the ridge, into a valley said to be friendlier to Waldensians, where others like them had gathered and built shelters beneath the cliffs. The journey would take 3 days. They moved quietly, traveling at dawn and dusk, resting in thickets during the day. Once, they passed a burned-out cottage. The wood was charred black, the stone chimney still standing. Tomas stared at it for a long time. "I think this was my uncle's home." No one said anything. That night, as they camped beneath a tangle of branches, Lenora watched a single firefly drift between the trees. It seemed impossible that something so small could still shine. The cliffs of Freycinet. They reached the hidden valley just before dusk on the third day. It opened suddenly, a bowl between peaks, ringed by cliffs and shadowed by tall rock spires. In the lower cleft of the valley stood rough structures, huts, lean-tos, and canvas-covered pits dug into the earth. People moved quietly among them. Waldensians. Lenora saw children carrying wood. Old women tending small fires. Men sharpening tools or drawing water from the narrow stream that cut through the rock. A woman approached them, a tall figure in a cloak of moss-dyed wool. Her face was lined, her hair silver, but her eyes were kind. "You've come far," she said. "You're safe now. Come. There's space for you in the north shelter." And so they entered the valley of Freycinet, a place older than maps, known only by word and by faith. And for the first time in many weeks, they slept without fear. Shelter beneath the cliffs. The north shelter was little more than a hollow beneath an overhang of ancient rock. A canopy of pine boughs had been stretched across the front, tied down with vines and softened by strips of old wool and moss. Inside, there were sleeping pallets fashioned from dry reeds and hides, and a small fire circle set near the edge to keep smoke from collecting under the stone. The woman who had greeted them introduced herself as Mireille. She had been among the first to arrive in the valley months earlier, when the villages along the Rhone began to burn. "My husband and sons did not escape," she said simply. "I help those who do." Lenora nodded in quiet understanding. Mireille gave them bread, rough, sour, heavy with root flour, and a broth made from foraged leeks and river herbs. Lenora sipped it slowly, savoring the warmth. Her father lay back against a blanket roll, breathing calmly now. That night, she slept dreamlessly for the first time in many months. The valley's quiet rules. Life in Frissoniers was not easy, but it was shared. There was no single leader, only a quiet agreement among those who remained: work as you can, share what you have, keep silence when needed. Fires were small and shielded by stone, songs were sung only in murmurs, tools were muffled in cloth when used. There were perhaps 70 people hidden in the valley, men, women, children, all weather-worn and thin but alive. Every evening, small gatherings formed in sheltered hollows for prayer and sharing. Daniel helped repair the water channel, using his knowledge of carving to reline the stone ditches that carried stream water to the lower huts. Lenora learned to make root paste for the sick, boiling dried lily bulb, tree resin, and snow water until thick. Tomas worked with the goat herders who kept their animals in a fenced grove behind the southern rise. And their father, though weak, began to speak again. "The word survives in silence," he said one morning as Lenora helped him to sit upright. "Even in caves, the word remains." Letters carried by wind. One afternoon, a stranger arrived in the valley. He wore no cloak and carried no weapon. Only a satchel of thin paper and a long walking stick wrapped with worn blue cloth. He introduced himself as Brother Just. "I come from Prali," he said. "3 days northwest, through the pass. I carry news, and letters." At once, people gathered around him, not crowding, but listening with quiet urgency. He read from a folded parchment, worn from much use. "To the faithful in hiding, hold your peace. The flames rise, but the branches do not break. We live still in the Spirit. The Lord has not abandoned us. Gather what food you can. Others come." There were sighs. Nods. Some wept quietly. Then he produced a smaller letter, sealed with wax. He read, "To Lenora, daughter of Stephen the Elder." She stepped forward slowly. The letter was from her uncle in the hills of Dauphiné. He had heard whispers that they might have fled. He was alive. Safe. And had space for them in his farmstead. But the message came with warning: the valley is not safe for long. There are movements in Gap. More soldiers coming. Smoke from the east. A week later, smoke was seen from the east ridge. Thin, black, and still, like the ones before. Mireille gathered the elders in the central hollow. There were only 7 of them, but they represented every corner of the valley. Lenora sat beside her father, who listened with furrowed brow. "We must decide," Mireille said. "Do we remain in hiding, or move west through the old trails?" "It is nearly spring," one man said. "The passes will open. The risk is less now. But soldiers travel quicker on thawed ground," another murmured. They argued quietly, but no voices rose. At last, her father stood slowly, leaning on Daniel. "We may live another season in caves," he said, "or we may walk toward hope. Either way, we suffer. But if we move, we suffer for the future. If we stay, we suffer for the present." No one answered. But the silence agreed. Preparations began the next morning. The first step toward hope. They packed little. Bread hardened in cloth. Dried nettle. Wild mustard seed. Water pouches and a small carved cross. The Bible, wrapped again in hide and strapped to Lenora's chest. The valley was still, as if holding its breath. Those who stayed behind, the old, the frail, the deeply wounded, stood at the edge of the lower cliff, watching. Lenora turned and waved once to Mireille, who nodded in return. And then they began. The trail west was narrow and steep. Snow still clung to the shadows, but green shoots had begun to appear in the sunnier bends. Birds called from hidden nests. They moved in silence, 27 of them. Daniel led with Tomas, scanning ahead. Lenora followed with her father. Behind her came a mother and 2 girls, and then the rest. By nightfall, they reached the ridge. And as the stars emerged above the peaks, bright and cold, they built their first fire in open air. It burned low and warm. And no one stopped them. The night fire. They sat around the fire in silence. The stars overhead were brighter than ever, cold pinpricks in a velvet sky. The mountains surrounded them on all sides, sleeping giants whose breath came in sighs of wind. Daniel added a branch to the flames. Its crackle was the only sound. Lenora sat beside her father, his hand resting on hers. The warmth of the fire reached only so far, but it was enough. She closed her eyes, listening not just to the sounds around her, but to the quiet within. A child across the circle stirred in sleep. A goat bleated softly nearby. Beyond that, nothing but the hush of the world turning slowly under stars. Tomas leaned over. "We're safe tonight." Lenora nodded. And the night held them gently in its arms. Signs in the forest. The trail led them through an ancient pine forest the next day. The trees grew thick and tall, many leaning at strange angles as if shaped by centuries of wind. Some trunks had been marked, cuts in the bark, symbols left by hands long gone. Daniel paused at one. A small cross, carved into the wood. "Someone's been here," he said. "Before us." "Waldensians?" Tomas asked. "Or those who helped them?" There were whispers among the group of safe houses, old shepherd shelters used by those fleeing persecution. Not all had been discovered by soldiers. Some remained hidden in the folds of the earth. Lenora looked ahead. The trail was steep now, but her steps felt lighter. The forest carried a strange kind of peace, as though the trees themselves had known suffering and survival. And in the quiet, they walked on. The hidden hollow. On the 3rd day, they found the hollow. It was a wide basin of earth, cupped gently between 2 ridges and surrounded by trees. A small stream ran along its edge, shallow but clear. Moss covered the rocks. Birdsong returned. Daniel stepped into the clearing first. "It's sheltered," he said. "Good ground. Water. And we can see the sky." The group entered slowly, examining the place with cautious hope. The children wandered near the stream, their bare feet splashing. Lenora helped set down the satchels, laying out the bundles of dried food. That night, they did not sleep in fear. They slept in a kind of peace. It was not home. But it was something close. Bread from ashes. Food was scarce still. But Daniel and Tomas built a smoke pit, using stone and old pine logs. They used it to dry fish from the stream, to roast wild roots, to make bitter bread from flour carried in secret since the caves. Lenora stirred nettle soup one morning, glancing at the flicker of sun between branches. Her father approached and sat beside her. "Did I ever tell you," he said, "about the feast in Montreux?" She shook her head. "We sat on the floor. Bread, dried fruit, a little wine from the cellar. Your mother sang something sweet, we weren't allowed to sing openly. But that night, we did." He paused. "I never thought that would be the last meal before the soldiers came." They sat in silence a while. Then he smiled faintly. "But this is not so far from that." Lenora leaned against him. And in the steam from the soup, something like memory returned. A visitor from the smoke. On the seventh day in the hollow, they heard footsteps. Daniel rose quickly, hand on his small hatchet. Tomas climbed a rock to see. It was a woman. Thin, wrapped in rags, her feet bleeding from cold and cuts. Behind her, two children, eyes wide and hollow. They had come from the south ridge, fleeing the burning of their hamlet. She collapsed as she entered the clearing, and Lenora rushed to her side. "Please," the woman whispered. I heard there were those still alive." "You heard right," Lenora said softly. "You're safe now." They gave them water, soup, and a place near the fire. Others came that week. A man with a broken leg. A pair of sisters who spoke only in whispers. An old monk who carried a bag of dried parchment pages. Each had walked through fire to reach that place. And the hollow became more than shelter. It became sanctuary. The words carved in stone. The monk, Brother Emmerin, was nearly blind but remembered the scriptures by heart. He spent his days murmuring psalms and smoothing stones from the stream. On the smoothest ones, he carved short verses with a rusted knife. "Not for show," he said. "For memory." Lenora helped him one afternoon. He handed her a small stone with trembling fingers. On it were carved the words, "Though we walk through fire, we are not alone." She held the stone in her palm, its warmth from the sun deep within the grain. "May I keep this?" she asked. He nodded once. And so she placed it beside her bed that night. A reminder. That suffering did not mean abandonment. The spring of returning things. Spring arrived at last, fully and without hesitation. The snow melted from the ridges. The stream swelled. Moss brightened to emerald. Birds returned in flocks, and small flowers pushed up between stones. Food was still hard to find, but it no longer felt desperate. The land had softened. The world, at last, had begun to open its arms again. One morning, Tomas called from the trees. "Smoke," he said. Panic rippled through the hollow, until Daniel climbed to see. "It's from far off," he said. "A town." "Not here." They relaxed, but the reminder lingered. The world outside still burned. But here, life had begun again. The gathering song. On the first Sunday after thaw, Lenora awoke to the sound of voices. Soft. Low. Harmonizing in the morning stillness. She stepped outside and found the others gathered in a circle. Brother Emmerin stood in the center, eyes closed, his voice leading a hymn. Though mountains fall and rivers dry, the word shall stand, and we shall rise. Others joined in. Her father. Tomas. Daniel. Even the children, humming gently. No soldiers came. No flames reached them. Only light. Only song. And in the early sun, their shadows stretched gently across the green earth. The map of ash and memory. The monk, Brother Emmerin, called Lenora to his side one morning. He had spread a cloth on the ground, stained and weathered, with faint markings drawn in ash and charcoal. A crude map. "This is what I remember," he said. "Of where we were, and what was lost." He pointed with a crooked finger. "Here is Embrun, where I lived. The tower is gone now. Burned in winter." His hand moved. This was Lacour, fields of barley. Gone. Another place. Montclair. The black cross was drawn on every door. Lenora sat beside him, silent. "These are only names now," he whispered. "But once, they were songs. They were children laughing. Bells at dusk. Bread in warm hands." She took a small scrap of fabric from her pouch and laid it next to the cloth. On it, she began to stitch the names he spoke. If they took the land, she said softly, we will carry the names. And so a new map began, one made not of roads or rivers, but of memory. The child called Hope. One of the women in the hollow, Morel, had been quiet for days. No one disturbed her, but Lenora had noticed her hands resting on her belly more often. And then, one morning, as the mist hung low and the birds began their morning calls, a cry rang out, not of pain, but of life. A baby girl was born beneath the pine trees. Tomas, wide-eyed, brought water from the stream. Daniel brought clean cloth. Brother Emmerin offered a prayer, his voice trembling. Lenora sat beside Morel and took the tiny child in her arms. The girl's eyes were shut tight, her fingers curled like ivy tendrils, her breath steady. Morel smiled weakly. Her name, she whispered, is Esperance. Hope. The name traveled softly through the camp that day, from lips to ears, warming every heart. A child had been born not in a village, nor a town, but in exile, in survival, and still, she lived. Hope lived. The return of green. It was a season of growth. The hollow filled with wild garlic, sweet fennel, and tender roots. The goats bore kids, and even the smallest among the group began to run with lightness again. Daniel and Tomas built a second shelter of woven pine and dry stone. Lenora taught the children how to recognize safe herbs. Others planted seeds brought from distant farms, flax, lentils, and wild grain. The stream grew quieter as the thaw slowed, its waters clear and calm. One evening, Lenora's father sat beside her, looking out across the hollow. I never thought I would see another spring, he said. She rested her head on his shoulder. I never let myself hope. He was silent a moment. Now you must. And the breeze carried that word, hope, through the budding trees. The travelers from the ridge. Late one dusk, two figures appeared at the edge of the forest. Daniel called gently, who goes there? The figures stepped forward, hands raised. A man and woman, cloaked in travel-stained wool. They bore no weapons. Only tired eyes and cautious movements. We heard of a place, the man said. Where the word still breathes. You found it, Tomas said simply. They were fed and given rest. And in the night, they shared stories of where they had been, a cave near Sisteron, burned. A priest who gave them shelter and was taken. A brother who had not survived the mountains. More names. More songs gone. And yet they had walked. Walked toward the breath of a rumor, and found it real. Each person in the hollow, in some way, had done the same. And so the circle grew again. The quiet lessons. Life in the hollow took on rhythm. Morning, fetch water, tend fire, gather roots. Midday, teach letters to the young. Afternoon, mend clothing, dry fish, stir stews. Brother Emmerin taught the children psalms in song. Lenora taught them how to read names from cloth. Daniel crafted wooden cups, notched with crosses. Tomas worked on strengthening the shelters. Others carved spoons, wove mats, and tended small gardens behind the rocks. The hollow was no longer a hiding place. It was a home. Not by walls, nor by gate, but by love. And though no bell rang to call them to prayer, the silence became sacred. The bell made of wood. One day, the children asked, why don't we have a bell? We cannot make metal ring without drawing danger, Lenora replied. But Brother Emmerin smiled. We can still mark the hour. So Daniel carved a long wooden chime from the branch of a fallen fir. It hung from a high post at the center of the hollow. Every morning and every evening, it was struck once. A dull, warm tone, not loud, not sharp, but deep and grounding. The sound traveled softly through the trees. And it reminded all who heard it. We are still here. A word returned. One afternoon, as Lenora tended the edge of the stream, she heard a voice behind her. Lenora. She turned. A man stood there, older than she remembered, but unmistakable. Uncle Michel, she whispered. He nodded, tears in his eyes. He had come from Dauphiné. The letter he had sent had never been answered. And still he had walked. Walked through rain and wind, past fire and fear. And now he had found her. She led him into the hollow. Her father wept. Tomas embraced him. Even the children sensed something sacred in the reunion. And for the first time in a long, long while, Lenora felt something like joy rise in her chest. Not relief. But joy. The season of stone flowers. As summer unfolded over the hollow, something changed in the earth. Small blue flowers began to appear near the rocks, tiny blossoms that had not bloomed in years. Brother Emmerin, resting in the shade, smiled when he saw them. Stone flowers, he said. We had these when I was a boy. They only bloom when the soil is healing. The children picked them carefully and laid them beside their beds. Lenora pressed one between the pages of her journal. Tomas carved a small flower into the lintel of the food shelter. Life was still hard. Food was rationed. The nights were cold. Some carried the pain of injury or loss that would never fully fade. But they were healing. And the stone flowers, blooming in quiet defiance, said what words could not. The name in the wind. One dusk, as the fire was being prepared, a name drifted into the hollow. Not from a voice, but from memory. Lenora had been humming a hymn. She didn't realize the tune she had chosen until Brother Emmerin opened his eyes suddenly. That was her song, he said. Marguerite's. He hadn't spoken of her before. She was my sister. She did not escape the tower. I buried the melody because the pain was too loud. He bowed his head. But you brought it back. And it was not sorrow I felt. It was her voice. Lenora placed her hand on his. That means she lives, she whispered. He nodded, eyes glistening. And the wind carried the tune onward through the trees. Smoke on the horizon. The warning came not from sound, but from smell. Wood smoke. Distant. Faint. But it carried. Tomas was the first to notice it. He climbed the ridge and returned by nightfall. His face was pale. A village west of the valley. Burned. They're moving again. Fear stirred the hollow. Some packed belongings. Others cried silently into blankets. But Daniel held his ground. We've hidden. We've survived. We've healed. He looked at the chime. We will not run again unless we must. Brother Emmerin nodded. A people can survive fire. But they cannot survive silence. That night, the fire burned low. And though no one sang, they did not tremble. The hollow held its breath. But its roots had grown deep. The letter from the ridge. 2 days later, a boy arrived. Barefoot, dust on his skin, carrying a folded cloth. Inside it, a letter. It was unsigned. Written in a careful hand. To those who remain. The soldiers have turned north. A path is clear. But not for long. Trust the woods. Trust the name. There are others still walking. They seek what you have built. Daniel read it aloud. A hush followed. Someone had seen them. Someone had warned them. And someone was still watching over them. Tomas placed the letter in the wooden shelter, beneath the stone cross. We are not alone. And for the first time in weeks, Lenora smiled. The story told in circles. As the stars returned each night, they began a ritual. Around the fire, each person shared one story. A memory. A lesson. A name. A child told of a goat that survived a fall from a cliff. An elder spoke of a wedding dance in the snow. Tomas remembered his sister's hands, always warm even in winter. Lenora spoke of her mother's comb, how it still smelled of lavender. And one night, Daniel told of the day the forest first sang to him. He had been a boy. Lost. But the trees whispered a path, and he followed. The circle of stories grew each night. And when silence finally came, it wasn't empty. It was full. The first celebration. When autumn approached, they planned a feast. Not of excess, but of gratitude. Morel roasted wild roots. Tomas caught river trout. The children gathered berries. Lenora baked the last flour into flat bread sweetened with honeycomb found in a hollow log. They sang softly as they ate, and no one watched the sky for smoke. Brother Emmerin raised his wooden cup. We were meant to be ashes, he said. But see, our fire still burns. Even the trees seemed to listen. And the stars that night blinked like lanterns held in the hands of angels. The returning cross. Before winter, a stranger arrived. An old man. Hunched, but strong. He bore no food or coin. Only a wooden cross. It was charred black on one side. The other was smooth. I carved this when I was 20, he said. It hung above our chapel. Before it was taken. He placed it gently on the altar stone in the clearing. It still belongs to those who believe. No one spoke. Lenora placed her hands on the cross. The wood was warm. She bowed her head. And the others followed. They had no church, no steeple, no bell of iron. But they had this. And it was enough. Snow without fear. The snow returned. Soft. Gentle. Without the menace it once held. They prepared early, stacked wood, salted meat, sealed shelter walls. This time, they were not desperate. They were ready. Children danced as flakes fell. Songs were sung. Old stories retold. And Lenora sat by the fire, her journal in her lap, writing the final pages of a story. Not just hers. Theirs. The binding thread. As the snow fell heavier, Lenora sat by the fire and continued her stitching. The cloth map had grown large, more than a map now. It was a record. A tapestry. Each name sewn in faded thread. Each place once destroyed, now remembered. Brother Emmerin watched her. You are making a testament, he said softly. A memory, she replied. More than that. You are sowing a future. Each name tells a child, we were here. She paused in her stitching and nodded. Yes. We were here. And the thread passed through cloth again, binding what was once broken. The Book of the Hollow. The snow covered the pines like dusted wool. Days passed in hush and routine. It was then that Lenora's father gave her a gift. Wrapped in cloth, tied with a pine cord. A book. I began it when your mother was taken, he said. It is only bits and pieces. She opened it and found his handwriting, sketches of herbs, stories, songs, names, and prayers. Pressed leaves between the pages. Even drawings of the hollow. "This is your book now," he whispered. "Finish it." Lenora held it close to her chest. "I will." And in the days that followed, she added her words beside his. Her hand next to his hand. The past beside the present. The book of the hollow. The fire in the pines. That winter, the cold was fierce, but not cruel. They had enough. Not plenty, but enough. But one night, lightning struck a tree on the edge of the ridge. A fire bloomed suddenly, like a breath held too long. Panic stirred. Buckets were filled. Snow was thrown. Men and women ran with branches, stamping out flame. Tomas led them. His voice calm, his strength sure. And they succeeded. By dawn, the flames were dead. Smoke rose like incense in the gray light. They lost 2 shelters and a store of root vegetables. But no lives. Daniel touched the scorched tree. "We're still standing," he said. Lenora nodded. "Yes. Just like this tree." When the snow sang. As the fire cooled, peace returned. And then, one night, something extraordinary happened. It began with the wind, a soft breeze that stirred the branches. The snow settled in strange ways. Each flake landed with a tiny chime, like glass on stone. The children heard it first. "The snow is singing," one whispered. No one spoke above a murmur. No one wanted to break it. For hours, the forest echoed with the soft sound of ice and tree and wind. Brother Emmerin smiled. "A hymn," he said. "A hymn we did not teach." They all stood quietly in the clearing, heads tilted toward the sky. And in that soundless song, they felt love. The trail of kindness. With spring again on the horizon, the snow began to soften. One morning, they discovered something new, carved into a pine trunk at the edge of the hollow. A symbol. A simple mark, shaped like a fish. Daniel stared at it. "It's a sign. A traveler's sign." Others had passed this way and left a message. It meant, safe haven. "We're not hidden anymore," Lenora said. "We're a mark on the path." From then on, they left offerings at the ridge, dry herbs, a carved spoon, a pouch of salt. Not much. Just enough. So that those still walking would know, they were not forgotten. The river again. It had been 2 years since they first found the hollow. One morning, Lenora returned to the river's bend, the very spot where she had first collapsed in snow. The tree was still there. The bend the same. But she was not. She had changed. She was stronger. Wiser. Her heart was full of names, and her hands of stories. She knelt and pressed her palm into the mud beside the stream. A quiet prayer. A thank you. She did not need to speak. The water carried her message away. The final winter passing. Brother Emmerin passed away that final winter. Quietly. Peacefully. In his sleep, beneath his woolen blanket, with the wooden chime hanging above. He had asked for no sorrow. "Only continue," he said. They buried him at the high slope, where the sun first touched the snow each morning. Tomas carved a cross into the stone. Lenora laid her stitched cloth beside him for 1 hour. Then took it back. Because the memory must go on. Because the journey never truly ends. The Song of the Hollow. Years later, the hollow still stood. Trees grew taller. The shelters were rebuilt again and again. Children became parents. The Book of the Hollow became 2, then 3. Travelers still arrived, tired, searching, carrying stories on their backs. And when they came, they were met with warmth, food, silence, and song. Lenora, now gray-haired and steady, sat beneath the chime most evenings, stitching still. One thread for every soul. Every mile walked. Every flame endured. She no longer feared the wind. She welcomed it. Because the hollow was not just a place. It was a breath. A vow. A promise. We were here. We are still here. We will always be. The end.